Remember when Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell warned that the U.S. economy was facing a downturn without modern precedent? He was right, of course. Yesterday, another 1.3 million people filed for unemployment insurance, far and away the worst week on record, except for the 16 weeks before it, each with more than 1 million people filing for benefits. But this week, we also learned that a downturn without modern precedent doesn't mean everyone is feeling so down. The 5 biggest investment banks on Wall Street are all profitable. Morgan Stanley just had the most profitable quarter in its history. And Goldman Sachs is on such a tear that one analyst described its earnings as almost indecent. But here's what's really unbelievable. The disconnect between Wall Street and Main Street, this gold rush on one while there are literal bread lines on the other, is not a bug in the system. It is a feature of the system. To soften the economic blow of the pandemic, the Fed flooded the economy with cheap cash and very few strings attached. And it's clearly working for the banks. But it may be about to get a whole lot worse for everyone else. At the end of this month, millions of Americans are slated to lose the extra $600 a week they've been receiving as part of the CARES Act, money that has been a crucial lifeline. To his credit, Chairman Powell has called on Congress to do more to provide relief for out-of-work Americans in April, and again in May, and again in June. If that money runs out while the virus keeps surging, eventually everyone hurts, and maybe even that'll turn to the banks. With me now is Sheila Kolhatkar, staff writer at The New Yorker. Sheila, thanks so much for joining us. I want to talk about this disconnect between Wall Street and Main Street. How is it that you can have Morgan Stanley posting its most profitable quarter on record, and as one analyst put it, Goldman Sachs can have indecent earnings, while on the other side of things, you can have millions of Americans going to food pantries?
One thing that's important to remember is that the stock market, much as President Trump likes to brag about it, the stock market is not an accurate reflection of the economic health of Main Street America. And the people who tend to benefit the most from a rising stock market are corporate executives, investors in big investment funds like hedge funds. And while there are many Americans with money invested in retirement accounts, usually that does not translate into food on the table. So they're really not reflecting the same world.
The unemployment benefits, the extra $600 runs out at the end of the month. There is more urgency around potentially extending that. Steve Mnuchin was talking about how there needs to be another stimulus. The president is talking about how he wants a payroll tax cut included. Would a payroll tax cut help average Americans?
The payroll tax cut, which the president has been talking about since the beginning of this, it's a little controversial because it only helps people who are employed. And a lot of economists believe that in a situation like this, an unprecedented sort of across the board economic collapse, you need to get cash into people's hands. And the CARES Act did do a pretty effective job of that initially, sending this extra $600 a week that put money in people's pockets. It gave people spending power, which is going to help the economic recovery. But of course, we're facing a cliff when that ends. And if it is not extended, there are going to be a lot of people in serious financial distress. And of course, making this disconnect with the rising stock market all the more glaring. And that's something they're really going to have to address in Washington.
How much did that tax cut that the president and Congress passed a couple years ago have to do with this widening gap between the very rich and the middle of America?
Well, I interviewed the Treasury Secretary recently for a New Yorker piece, and he was adamant that 2017 tax cut helped working Americans. But of course, there have been many economic analyses that concluded that the majority of the benefit of that tax cut went to large corporations. They dropped the corporate tax rate drastically. And the expectation and the argument had been that those companies would have more profits and they would use that to invest in their workers and build plants and facilities and give raises in wages to their workers. And of course, what ended up happening is a lot of that money ended up being spent on stock buybacks, which again tends to benefit company executives who own a lot of stock. And there were some wage increases, but they were relatively small. And of course, middle American wages have not gone up in 30 or 40 years when you adjust for the cost of living. So although they had promised that there'd be this sort of trickle down effect of that big corporate tax cut, it did not really translate into benefits for average families.
And quickly, if you can, if that $600 extra unemployment benefit runs out and is not re-upped, what is that going to mean?
It's going to mean a lot of economic pain for individuals across the country. And of course, individual state unemployment benefits may still be available, but in many cases, it's not enough. And that is going to make this economic crisis worse, not better.
And interestingly, a lot of that money is going for people to pay rent, to pay their mortgages, to pay their loans, paying back the very big banks that seem to be doing so well during this pandemic.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.